artists, today I'm going to show you how you can finish your koi fish picture. You can use crayons and just color it in, or you can use markers and do a watercolor technique. What you would need for that is just water and some markers. All right, so get your koi fish picture that you've been working on and let's get started. Artists, so here I've got two examples of what that you can choose from to finish your koi fish picture. So in this example, I have used all crayon. Okay, notice that we still have that sense of movement in the picture. And in this one, I have used watercolor / marker technique that we used back when we used our day and night picture. So this will be kind of familiar to you. I will show you how to get started on both ways. And here's what you need. Before, you don't just color this in. Don't just do that. What I want you to do, we want to start incorporating some of the cool colors. So I am going to grab my green crayons right now. And what we're going to do is add some seaweed or plants to the water, because koi fish love to swim amongst different kinds of seaweed, which are just plants that grow underwater. And to kind of help assist that sense of movement that we were trying to get in this picture, I am going to use a curving line to draw some of my seaweed. If you want it to go behind part of your fish like I did there, just jump over and keep going until you think it's long enough. Then what you're going to do is you're going to add some leaves. And the shape of the leaf you want to add is really up to you, or the size. Maybe you would like them smaller or larger or more pointy. That I will leave up to you. I would like you to go ahead and make more than one seaweed. I think I need one. We want it to look like the water's moving and swishing the seaweed around. So that's why I'm adding the curved lines. And if you want to make that line thicker, you certainly can. You can use more than one color of green. I've just been using one. That is up to you. Now, once you think you've got enough seaweed, maybe one more piece here, we are going to start adding some ripples in our water. And you will do this really if you are going to, oh, I think I need one more, change my mind. I like to have variety in my seaweed too. I don't know if you've noticed, but sometimes I'll have short ones. Sometimes I'll have really long ones, so that they're not all the same. All right, so I'm done with the green, and now let's talk water. There's two ways I showed you that you can do your water. If you are going to do it with crayon, you will use the cool colors, the other two cool colors, so which are your blues and your purples, to start coloring. Now, what I did in this one is I used one color. I kind of chose this sky blue color, it's called blue green, to color my water. I don't care if you want to use a different color, that is up to you. And if you're doing this in all pencil, you can still do just one color. So what you would do is before you start coloring, I want you to add some lines showing the ripples or the water moving. And so you can do that by adding a spiral. You can do those. Now, not all of your lines have to be made with the same. You can switch. Wherever you've got room, you can add spirals. Now, you don't only have to add spirals. If you would like to add some other curving lines to show water moving, you can do that. And after you think you've got, maybe I'll have kind of like a little tail. Sometimes like it mirrors what the fish are doing. And I like to draw lots of these, maybe just a little curl sometimes a big swirl. You get to decide in your picture. And once you've got those lines drawn with your crayon, then you can take your crayon and just start coloring over. Now I'm not pushing as hard so that I do not cover up those swirling lines. I'm also controlling, not going too fast so that I don't run into my fish, and so that I can fill up all the areas. Now this can take a little bit of time, so if you're doing this at home, make sure you take breaks. And if your swirls and your wave lines get covered up, then you just go back over them and with a darker color, or push harder with your crayon. If you would like to add bubbles to your water, maybe you'd like to just have a place where some bubbles were formed, where the water was moving, you can draw little circles for that, and then just don't fill in those, just leave them white. Now, if you're going to want to, you would color the whole thing until everything in your picture is filled in, like this one. All right, now, if you've decided you'd rather try the marker technique, what you need to do, I've got another one here, is you need to find the cool colors with markers. Now, I'm using Crayola. I find that they work really good for this technique. As long as your marker is a water-based marker, which means when it gets wet that it smears, this will work. So permanent markers won't work for this. So I've got my cool colors, blue, green, and purple. And you can decide, I like a lot of, you know what, before I do green, you know what, if I make my seaweed with the marker, it's going to smear. So I don't want my seaweed to smear, so I think I'm going to take my crayon, and I'm just going to do like I did with the crayons on the other one and make some seaweed. I'll quickly do that. The nice thing about making seaweed is it's not super hard. Now the other interesting thing, we talked about bubbles in the last picture with just crayon. You could do the same thing with the marker, but I'm going to use my white crayon, and I am going to just put some bubbles here and there around my paper. You can decide how many you want to do. It's okay if you don't remember where they are too. Now I've already used my green for my cool color, so what I have left are my purple and my blue. And if you only want to use one of those, that's fine, but I'm going to use both. And we're going to do the same thing we did with the crayon that I showed you with the crayon. This time I'm going to add some spirals. Remember, the more ink that you put on your paper, oops, there's a little crayon there of white, that's okay. I'm going to try to add a lot of these spirals and other curvy lines, because the more that I put on here, the more I think I'm going to start just adding some other curvy lines. I'm going to remember to save some room for my purple too, so I think I'll get out my purple right now. I can always come back and add more blue. The thing you must remember when you're doing this, the more lines you add, the darker and brighter your water will be once we add the water to it. So I am filling in lots of curvy little lines. And I think I should get a little more blue in. I've got a lot of purple lines. Let's go back to blue for a little while. All right, you can see that I've added a lot of lines. I've tried to make sure this whole picture is really full of lines, even if they're small and short like that. And if I see there's a little room for a line, I try to stick it in there. All right, once you think you have enough lines, and I think I do, you're going to take a little bit of water. You don't need very much. And I like to use a paintbrush. This is one of my old paintbrushes. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. If you're out of paintbrushes and you're doing this at home, you can use, I actually have used just my finger to move the water around. Also, I have used a cotton swab, like a Q-tip. All of that works. So what you're going to do, I like to start in a corner and get that wet right to the edges. I lay my brush kind of on its side to help spread the paint around. Now, when I knew I was going to be using the marker on this, so I made sure when I was coloring that I pushed very hard with my crayons, and that kind of helps push away the water when you're doing this. You don't need to like paint back and forth a lot, just get it wet. Try not to let it puddle too much because it will take a long time for it to dry, and it ended up making just a mess. So take your time, spread the water around. If you start to hear a scratchy noise like that, that's your brush telling you it needs more water. And if it doesn't have enough water, you'll try to push harder. And your brush almost screaming to you, please give me more water. If you don't have enough water on your brush will dry out. It doesn't paint very well. And then a lot of people try to just push harder on their brush, but all that does is really just ruin the brush and ruin the hairs on it. It can snarl those and make quite a mess. So be gentle with your brush and make sure you're using enough water. If you see a puddle forming on your paper, if you notice there's a big puddle, instead of dipping, just try to move your brush over there and help spread that around. Notice once I've painted an area, I don't go back over it unless I realize I've missed a spot. So it's just basically getting the paper wet and letting those colors spread and do their own thing. Now, if you're at home and you're trying this watercolor painting technique, there is something special if you move fast enough that you can do. What you would need though is a little bit of salt. I'll show you my little trick with salt. So I'm getting this wet. It doesn't work if your paper's dry. So I better move fast because I've got a lot of paper here that needs to be filled in. Be very gentle. My crayons keep rolling and in the way. I should have put them away before I started painting. I was excited and I wanted to paint. Did you ever do that? Remember, I colored this fish white. You can use white, and did you see the bubbles? The bubbles will, if you pushed hard enough with your crayon, they will stay white. So if you want something to stay white when you're doing this technique, make sure to use your white crayon. And it's a nice thing. You can kind of hold onto your paper wherever the fish are, so your fingers can stay out of the paint. Oops, did you see what happened? I forgot to color in the eyes of that fish. And sure enough, it filled in. All right, I'm down to the last corner. Maybe if I use long strokes, it can get it done quickly. As long as my brush isn't too dry, it goes pretty fast. Okay, now that I have this painted, I still have a little bit of water that is wet on my paper. It's not really puddly, but it's still wet. I can see it because it's shiny. You can use a little salt. I just have some, it's regular table salt that you buy at the grocery store. And you don't want a lot, but you can sprinkle a little bit of that on. And wherever it is wet, I'm not putting too much on here, it's going to have a reaction on the watercolor. And what happens is, wherever there's a little piece of salt, it dries faster. It basically kind of soaks up that water and it makes it look a little bit different. I'll show you on one here that is dry that I did the salt with. You can see that it leaves like little speckles in the water. So if you want to try that today, go ahead and give that a try. You have to wait for it to dry. And I'll show you what that looks like at the end of this video. All right, hope you've had fun today. Remember, if you don't have markers, use crayon. If you don't have crayons or markers, it's okay to leave this as a pencil drawing, but make sure you put lots of detail in there. And don't forget, you can still color things in with pencil too. Just don't color in everything. All right, I hope you've had fun and stay creative. Bye-bye.